Some places never rush. The clock ticks, but only softly. The light shifts gently, with years and weather and memory. There's a particular hush, not silence exactly, but something akin. It feels like what's left behind in a dream, or what you hear in the turning of a well-loved page. Libraries breathe that kind of quiet. Paper and possibility, tucked into rows. The smell of ink barely there, but unmistakable. Binding glue softened over time, like old bones. Flexing again. Even the dust, when it gathers, feels made of stories trying to settle down. They don't ask much of you, these places. Just that you lower your voice, maybe take your shoes off in your heart, and let the slow magic do its work. In a small town strung together by red brick and picket fences, there is such a library. It sits 3 streets off Main, tucked beside the bakery that sells out of cinnamon rolls by 10 a.m. Its windows frost early in the fall. A creaky ramp welcomes creaky knees. Everything inside whispers, "Stay a while." Inside, the walls wear their age well. Old wood beneath the paint, ancient radiators that thump into life in winter. Fluorescent lights flicker more than they ought to, casting gentle shadows across pine shelves, stacked tall and crooked with time. There's a coffee pot in the break room that never quite turns off, adding warm bitterness to the air. A patchwork rug in the children's corner. Has dinosaurs faded to ghosts? The staff computer clicks slowly, blinking like a tired eye. But beyond all of that, beyond the used paperbacks and the sigh of the heating vents, there's a window seat. It isn't much, just a narrow ledge lined with an old green cushion someone once meant to replace. But in that seat, as long as anyone could remember, sat a cat, a thick-furred tabby tinged in cinnamon and gray, sometimes curled into a perfect spiral, other times sprawled like he owned the institution. His eyes, wide and amber, held the weight of 1,000 unread books. To children, he was a fairy tale fixture. To the elderly, he was something to smile at in the quiet. To visitors, he was unexpected, then undeniable, a part of the place. Few knew where he had come from. Fewer still thought to ask. Some said he'd wandered in with the October leaves one year and never left. Others believed he was part of the building. Like the old radiator or the worn-out checkout desk, there was no record of him in the files, no chipped tag or collar, just an orange patch of fur that seemed to belong to everyone and to no one. But if you looked closely, you could see the way the cat's whiskers quivered when the doorbell chimed, the way his ears twitched when rustling pages passed nearby, the way he followed the footsteps of a woman named Margaret with something like devotion. Margaret was the librarian most often seen brushing past the desk with quiet efficiency. White cardigan, sensible slacks. Her graying hair always pulled back into a bun that somehow came undone by lunchtime. Over the years, she had become almost as much a fixture as the cat. She never said much about him, never claimed him out loud, just called him the gentleman, or sometimes quietly, when she thought no one was listening, Charlie. It was a name that belonged softly to him. As if it had always been his. People stopped wondering after a while. Charlie simply was. He watched, he purred. He dozed in sunbeams over pages wide open and forgotten. Never noisy, never needy, just there, the way good things sometimes are. There are places like that too, you know. Things you don't fully notice until they're gone. Until some part of you knocks gently on the memory and whispers, that mattered more than you knew. And sometimes they're not. Places. Sometimes they're cats who sleep in library windows and listen to more stories than they'll ever understand. So who was Charlie, really? He wasn't listed on the payroll. Never had a library card, at least not an official one. His tales were unwritten, his past a blank page. But every person who brushed snow from their boots at the library door had, at one point or another, looked toward that window and found him waiting. In time, people would learn more. About Margaret, about grief, about afternoons that changed shape when shared with something kind and wordless. But on days full of dry leaves and checkout stamps, in the stillness of a slow town and slower pages, there was only the library, the cushion, and a shape defined by stripes and sleep, and something like grace. This isn't a story about a cat, not really. It's a story about a window where love sat down quietly and stayed. The autumn he arrived, the mornings had begun to taste like copper and bark, and the town curled in on itself like hands around a worn mug. Leaves fell in slow orchestras, yellow giving way to brown, and the wind adopted a quieter, older voice as it moved down alleyways and across empty porches. The cat came with the wind, no announcement, no caller, just a flicker of fur behind the dumpsters. One Tuesday morning, spotted first by the baker 2 doors down, who simply muttered, "Poor thing," and left out a corner of his scone before going back inside. That first week, the cat didn't come close. He lingered, traced the outer edges of buildings like a shadow unsure of its body. His ribs curved sharply beneath his coat, and one ear was notched, as if life had already claimed something from him. His eyes, however, were fully intact, bright with a deep, knowing amber that met your gaze head-on, then dipped away like the last note of a sad song. Behind the library was where he began to haunt most often. There was a low porch there, with latticework caved in on one side and a rusted iron bench that left jagged shadows in the 4 p.m. sun. The scent of coffee and paper seemed to settle stronger there, spilling from the vents and door frames like a secret too tired to stay inside. Margaret noticed him before he noticed her, or perhaps that's only what she told herself. She'd seen the shadow out of the corner of her eye. Every afternoon for 5 days. Seen it stretch, coil, vanish when too near. Still, she left the back door ajar for a few moments longer. She moved fractionally slower when setting down her thermos. Her life had recently gone quiet. Her mother had passed that spring, and Margaret had packed away a whole house of photographs and soft wool sweaters and cans labeled with names she would never buy again. The world had kept turning, of course, quietly, steadily, and Margaret had let herself float along with it like a bookmark lost between chapters she hadn't meant to skip. She found herself speaking less, smiling only if there was cause. Mornings began and ended with tea left unfinished. But every day, she arrived at the library before the doors opened, unlocking the building as if waking a sleeping elder from a deep and dreaming nap. By the second week, a saucer had appeared on the back porch. It wasn't discussed. Margaret placed it just outside the door, the sound of metal on wood as discreet as breath. She filled it with plain water, and when it was emptied an hour later, she refilled it without comment. The next day, there was food. Not much. A half can of tuna she meant to add to lunch but didn't. She watched this time, just through the top corner of the window. The cat took 2 long minutes to approach, his shoulders tense, paws careful. But he ate every bite. It wasn't immediate. They never spoke, of course. Cats and librarians don't speak in words. But there was a growing recognition. The hinge of the back door began to croon instead of groan. Margaret kept her voice soft, even inside. She'd murmur greetings into the dusk, watching his ears swivel slightly from the bench where he lay curled. She nicknamed him Visitor at first, in her mind only, then Sir, when he began to appear just after she arrived in the mornings. A nod, perhaps, to the formal way he held himself while stretching or preening, as though his past had involved important rituals or long-lost velvet curtains. He never meowed, never scratched. Margaret wasn't sure if he even had a voice, but he listened. She could feel it, in the way his gaze followed her movements, in the attentive stillness of his posture, in the alertness that hummed beneath fur and skin, like a violin held just short of song. The library was emptier that season. More laptops than borrowed books. More footfalls echoing down empty halls. But Margaret showed up, as she always had, flicking on the fluorescents that buzzed overhead, dusting shelves that needed a story more than a cleaning. And each day, like punctuation, The cat was there, sometimes beneath the porch, tail flicking, sometimes atop the bench, one paw hanging off like a punctuation mark. Once, she even found him balanced on the edge of the dumpster, watching the crows as if debating theology. She began reading aloud in the afternoons, just softly, while shelving books alone. At first, just for herself. But then she noticed his ears tilting closer, the twitch of whiskers, the way he lingered long after the reading stopped. By the fourth week, she no longer needed to look to know he was near. Days started with the brush of fur glimpsed in the corner of her eye, and evenings closed with the sound of gentle paws padding away before dusk. Still, he never breached the threshold, never crossed the line from out to in, and Margaret never asked him to. Winter arrived early that year. One morning, the town awoke under a quilt of frost so fine it looked sown by breath. The wind, once playful, now carried a sharper edge. Roofs smoked with chimney trails, and the bakery's windows fogged faster than the panes could blink them away. The smell of cinnamon grew braver as, if to fight the cold, on a Tuesday, just past 8 a.m., Margaret turned the key in the library door, with hands tucked into wool gloves. Her breath marked the air in soft bursts. The porch boards creaked beneath her sensible boots, and her heart hesitated before she looked toward the bench. He was there, but something was wrong. Curled so tightly, he seemed barely more than a ball of fur. The cat was hunched under the iron bench, which now bore a thin glaze of ice. His coat looked wet, heavy with dew or something colder, and one paw was curled unusually under him. His eyes did not open at the sound of her approach. She set her thermos down and knelt slowly, knees complaining. "Sir," she whispered. "Visitor?" Nothing. Only the slight flick of a whisker as he drew in a halting breath. Against every rule she knew and every wariness he had ever worn, Margaret opened the back door wide, not caring that the warm air rushed out like an escaping whisper. She stepped inside and returned with a towel and an old shoebox lid, lined with scrap fabric from the storytime corner. She crouched again and gently, wordlessly, extended the towel. It took him a full minute. One eye blinked open, then the other. He lifted his head, turned it toward her, and then, impossibly, with careful hesitation, crawled from the space beneath the bench and into the circle of fabric she had placed. He crossed the threshold. Inside, the library smelled different in winter, more like radiator, less like sunshine. The air held that static warmth of old buildings, musty, forgiving. Margaret had set the towel near the heat vent, and he lay there, motionless but softly purring, as she brewed coffee she wouldn't drink. She didn't touch him, simply sat in a corner with the return cart, sorting books and glancing over every few moments, making sure the rise and fall of his breathing stayed steady. By afternoon, he lifted his head, blinked, groomed his shoulder in slow, deliberate motions. She dared to whisper, "Well, aren't you brave?" And he didn't flee. By dusk, he'd returned to the door, paused, looked at her. She didn't try to stop him. But the next morning, he was back, waiting. From that day forward, a new rhythm settled in, as invisible and as specific as a heartbeat. Each morning, Margaret unlocked the back door first. She left it open an inch longer than necessary, and always, eventually, he came, padding in with quiet familiarity, never loud, never urgent, just moving from cold to warmth like the logic of seasons. He began to favor the green cushion in the window seat. At first, tentatively. He'd leap up, circle twice, then lie down, paws placed neatly beneath him. Sometimes he watched the street. Other days he nestled so wholly into himself, he resembled nothing more than a particularly content loaf. Patrons began to notice. A little boy with sneakers that blinked brought him a handful of kibble on Wednesday mornings. A teenager, pink-haired and twitchy with nerves, snapped a photo from the hallway and whispered to no one in particular, "He looks like he's read everything." An elderly woman left a folded blanket near the seat with a note tucked underneath, "For the literary gentleman." Margaret placed a small sign on the windowsill, black marker on. Laminated cardstock. Charlie, it read. Below that, he is not lost, he is not lonely, he just prefers libraries. Charlie. The name hung gently in the air, as if shy about being spoken aloud. But it fit, the same way the library did, or the low hum of an old tune beneath memory. Margaret didn't tell anyone how she'd chosen it, but years ago, when dreams were still neat outlines and plans held no corners yet bent by sorrow, she'd imagined a little boy named Charlie, had once written it in the margins of a planner, above lists of groceries and doctor's appointments. And now, here it was again, written with permanence, woven into a life she hadn't expected. Charlie had no official title, but each day, people found different ways to greet him. A thumbs up from a delivery driver, a whispered secret from the poetry club's youngest member. One woman brought treats wrapped in paper towel and said with a laugh, "He listens." Better than my ex-husband ever did. Charlie bore it all, the attention, the affection, even the "did you post him today?" queries aimed at Margaret as phones pointed toward the window. He tolerated cuddles from the bold, offered purrs to the weary, and generally seemed to know who needed him and who didn't. Sometimes in the late hours, Margaret noticed he'd moved, quiet as fog, to sit beside someone alone at a table. Just sitting, just being. Once, Burina. Snowstorm, the town lost power, and Margaret opened the library early. Parents with restless children padded in, grateful. A group of teens huddled near the windows, cell phones dead and mouths full of cookie crumbs from the emergency stash. Charlie moved among them, steady and unbothered. When power returned and the lights blinked back to life, someone noticed he'd been curled in the lap of a woman, silently crying over her journal the whole time. He stayed. Margaret stopped calling him by nicknames. When others asked, she simply said, "That's Charlie," not claiming, not denying, just saying. The seasons turned as they do in towns like that, slow and proud and full of meaning. Snow yielded to slush, bare branches dared buds, children grew a little taller, and Margaret found herself humming again while shelving books, tapping her heels softly against cartwheels. But always there was Charlie, on the bench near the end. Heater, or most often, in the window. And on more than one occasion, as a page turned nearby, he'd look up, not at the noise, but at her, as if to say, "I'm here." It happened quietly, the way most important things do. One day, Charlie was just a cat in a window. The next, he was something else entirely. A presence, a pause between thoughts. A lighthouse, small and silent, blinking comfort for those who needed it most. It began with the boy. His name was Leo, though. It took 3 weeks for anyone to hear it out loud. He was 7, maybe 8, with shoulders always clenched, like he was waiting for a scolding. He never looked up when spoken to, only shuffled into the reading corner each Thursday, with his grandmother in tow. Her eyes tired, her cardigan always drooping from one shoulder, like the worry she carried was too much to wear evenly. He never spoke during story hour, just clutched the same book tight, ABC Adventures A. Safari through sounds and stared at the floor until he saw Charlie. The first week, he just pointed, eyes wide, mouth still. The second, he reached out a tentative hand toward Charlie's tail, hovering inches away. Charlie didn't flinch, didn't move at all, really. He simply blinked once, then stretched his front paws forward in that slow, luxurious way only cats can manage, extending trust like a gift. By the third Thursday, Leo was reading aloud, soft at first. Halting, like each word cost a bit of fear to speak. But he read, page by page, sitting cross-legged beside the window. Charlie remained beside him, head tucked in, purring so faintly you could only feel it if your fingers grazed his side. People noticed. Margaret did, of course, but so did others. Children began sitting quietly when Leo read. Even the more fidgety ones paused. Something about it felt sacred, like opening a letter meant only for one heart, and being allowed to overhear. Leo hadn't spoken in class for nearly a year. His teacher came in once on a borrowed lunch break and cried in the aisle behind the fiction shelves when she heard him giggle. Real, unplanned, full-bellied laughter. Because Charlie had sneezed while he was reading the letter H. Then there was Thomas. No one called him that. They just said Mr. Kendall or the postman, even though he hadn't delivered mail in over a decade. He'd been a regular before Charlie, a silent fixture who moved slowly through the shelves and checked out mystery novels with fragile covers and forgotten authors. But something changed after Charlie. He stopped checking them out, just came in, took the same chair near the west window and sat. Sometimes he brought a book, sometimes he didn't. But he always brought a thermos of tea and a small cushion, worn from the armchair in his living room, Margaret imagined, and always chose the seat closest to Charlie's perch. He never bothered him, just sat there, murmuring now and then in Charlie's general direction. Observations about the weather, memories about his wife's love for cardinals, a complaint or two about how the dryer wasn't heating quite right. She would have liked this cat, he said once. Used to say animals knew more than most people. Maybe that's why they're quiet. When he dozed mid-chapter, Charlie curled near his feet. When he spoke, Charlie turned his ears toward him like he was still deciding whether to trust the story. Then came Mina. Tall, always hunched. Hair dyed weekly, gray to orange to lime green, depending on what chapter of life she felt she was in. She came just after third period most weekdays, when the front hallway emptied out and the noise of lockers closing had retreated. She never said much to anyone, just wandered to the art books, flipped through sketch compilations, sometimes left pencil doodles on the back of old hold slips. A flower, a ship, once a pair of eyes nearly identical to Charlie's, drawn on the inside of a returned book cover. One day, she sat by the window and unpacked a spiry notebook full of smudges. Charlie approached, not directly, but in that sidewinding way he had, diagonal and aloof, then close enough to investigate. He sat beside her without question, guarded her silence like a sentry. An hour passed, 2. Margaret had nearly forgotten she was still there, until Mina stood quietly, placed a torn paper on the returns desk, and left. It said, "Thanks for letting me breathe here. He makes it easier." Soon others followed, a father with twin toddlers who liked to shriek delightedly at the vending machine, a college student home for winter break, trying to write a thesis that refused to write itself, a nurse who'd stopped by after night shifts, slumping into the picture book section to sip from a thermos and rest her eyes. All found their way to Charlie. Some left gifts, not toys, not collars, but the kind of things people offer when they respect a creature more than they expect it to respond. Wool scraps, poems folded in quarters, drawings taped discreetly to the frame of the window Charlie liked best. Margaret noticed, of course. She began making room for them. She brought a soft gray blanket from home and laid it across the window seat. She put a pewter bowl beside the radiator, filled with fresh water each morning, rinsed with care. She added a tiny woven basket by the encyclopedias, just big enough for Charlie, or a secret if someone needed to hide one away. And then there was the sign. It wasn't fancy, just cardstock again, laminated with the same machine that took too long to warm up. But it said something new now. Charlie's Corner. Please be kind. Please be gentle. And maybe, just maybe, he'll sit with you. It was pinned beneath the edge of the curtain. Kids pointed at it when they passed. Some took photos. One little girl saluted before sitting down beside it, crisscross applesauce and holding her juice box like it was a potion. A teenager once lit up when they saw someone else curled near Charlie and said excitedly, "You got chosen." Charlie, for his part, never seemed to notice the legend building around him. He just kept showing up, being still, listening, until all the library's patrons, young and old, hurried and hesitant, began to measure their visits not by the hour on the clock, but by the moments he stayed nearby. And outside the window, just beyond the frame, fall winds gave way to snow. On the Monday it happened, The sky was the kind of blue that made you forget winter had ever sharpened its teeth. The frost had ebbed, trees beginning to show soft hints of green, and the morning light poured through the blinds like a second promise. Margaret arrived at the library with her usual thermos and a subtle upbeat in her step, the one she reserved for her favorite weeks, the in-between ones, not quite winter, not yet spring. She balanced her keys, nudged the front door open, and automatically glanced toward the window. The cushion was empty. Not unusual, not at first. Charlie had been known to roam, to disappear for half a day and return, smelling of chimney smoke or wild grass, but Margaret lingered near the glass longer than usual, one hand pressed absent-mindedly against the pane. No paw prints in the dew, no tail curled beneath book carts or hiding under the radiator. She unlocked the back door early that day, let it stay ajar for 5 full minutes while she shelved new arrivals with silent optimism. Her motion seemed more precise, as though performing for an unseen audience, but still, nothing. That evening, she stayed late. Dust settled gently on the returns desk. A paperback she hadn't noticed before sat open at page 72. Still, no Charlie. She checked beneath shelves, inspected every shadow, and finally turned off the light slower than usual, hoping the night would stir him into returning. Tuesday came, then Wednesday. A week passed. The green cushion remained untouched. She told herself he was an outside creature, deep down, maybe. Something had snared his curiosity. Another porch, other people, warmer kitchens. But when the bowl by the radiator went untouched 4 days in a row, and Leo arrived for story time without his usual smile, Margaret felt it in her chest like a missed heartbeat. She hung a flyer. No color, just white paper and black ink. The library laser printer smudging slightly in the top right corner. Missing cat. Answers to Charlie. Seen often at Maple Street Library. Friendly, reserved, much loved. She posted it on the bulletin board beside the town hall schedule. By Thursday, 6 more appeared. 1 in the bakery, 1 at the veterinary office, the corner market, bus stops. Someone printed Charlie's picture from an Instagram post and added sparkles around his ears. Has anyone seen Charlie? In a teenager's loopy handwriting. The staff noticed. Visitors asked. A little girl brought a folded cardboard tag with "Come home." "Charlie, please, please, please," in red glitter pen, and nestled it against the leg of the bench where he liked to nap. And Margaret searched, morning, noon, and after sunset. She walked behind the building, toward dumpsters and down alleyways. Called through breath she kept low and careful. Carried a satchel of tuna and an old towel, just in case. Nothing. 10 days passed. The library stayed warm and busy, but air moved differently, quieter than before. As though a note had been pulled from the music and the silence didn't yet know how to fill the hole. Margaret found herself talking to memories. About Charlie's first paw print on her desk blotter. The way he once knocked over a plant with the dramatic flair of a misunderstood poet. How he followed the janitor for a week and then never again. Fragments filled the shelves. A young patron taped a tiny drawing beside the family computer. It said, "Come back, King." Charlie, in shaky block letters. There was a paw-shaped keychain left in the lost and found box, and no one returned to claim it. A bookmark appeared tucked inside a Virginia Woolf novel. Just a simple sentence, "You are missed." Then, on the 10th morning, the bench held something. It was subtle, barely there. A tangle of fur, orange and white, caught on the armrest. And beneath it, no bigger than a coin, a crumpled library card, chewed at the edge, Margaret found. It's sometime before lunch, and stood staring, heart lodged too high in her throat to speak. She didn't touch it, not at first, just sank into the bench, knees taut, shoulders heavy, and let the air fold around her like a sigh too long held. She cried for the first time since her mother died. Not loud, not desperate, just a quiet, breaking ache, the kind that's carried too long and finally finds someone to set it down beside. That evening, the sign in the window seat felt heavier. Charlie's corner, please be kind, please be gentle. No one sat there. Not that day, not the next. Margaret stopped unlocking the back door first thing. Instead, she walked in through the front each morning, moved less carefully, shelved books with robotic precision. Her thermos grew cold before it was ever opened. Even the silence felt lonelier, less pregnant with possibility, and more like an echo returned without company. But something unexpected happened. In absence, Charlie became presence. Stories spilled forward, the way he used to bump his head into Mr. Kendall's cane, how he'd once leapt into the arms of Mina uninvited. Details surfaced, tiny, sharp fragments of memory, stitched together in whispers and tangled tales. People didn't forget. If anything, they leaned in harder. A crocheted cat appeared on the return desk. A boy gave Margaret a handmade sticker that simply read, "Our good boy." The poetry club drafted an ode titled "Four Paws by the Pages," and in the quiet spaces of the library, Charlie's shadow grew long, cast by love, by memory, and by the simple, enduring miracle of being known. Still, Margaret waited, and she wondered, if love could leave this kind of space behind, maybe it could also find its way back. It was the third Saturday since Charlie vanished, when Margaret stopped looking up first thing. She walked into the library with keys that felt heavier in her hands. Thermos sloshing quietly with tea she no longer flavored. The ritual had dulled, unlocking, flipping signs, setting out the cart, and the window seat, once the soft heart of the room, had become something she passed her eyes over quickly, as if to avoid a splinter. The cushion remained undisturbed, the bowl beneath the radiator dry and tucked away, out of Hope's reach. It was nearly closing time when she heard it, a sound she knew too. Well, a scratch that wasn't quite claw or paw, a kind of shuffle muffled by wooden age coming from the back door. Margaret froze, fingers hovered over the return stamp, breath pulled inward but didn't release. The sound came again, this time a low, hesitant drag across the base of the door, like someone remembering how to knock. She made her way across the floor, slowly, careful not to hope too quickly. Doorknob beneath her palm, breath hitching just once, she opened it, and there he was, thinner, ragged around the edges in a way that made her ache. His right leg curved awkwardly beneath him, trembling slightly. A fresh scar bisected the fur above one brow. But his eyes, those wide amber eyes, met hers and held steady, as if anchoring both of them to the same quiet truth. She knelt, careful not to make it a moment larger than it needed to be. "Charlie," she whispered. He took one uncertain step forward, then another. The limp was pronounced but determined. He stopped just inside the doorway, looked up at her with something softer than pain, something like recognition. She didn't cry, not yet. Just reached toward him and offered the back of her hand, the way she had that first winter. He did not hesitate. Later, the vet would tell her he'd been hit by a car, likely not far from the library. Whoever found him had cleaned the wound and set the fracture, but hadn't chipped or collared. Him, a college student maybe, passing through for the holidays. Someone warm-hearted enough to help, kind enough to bring him back when they saw the flyer posted alongside the coffee shop bulletin board. They'd likely never know who. The gift of kind strangers is rarely asked for by name. Margaret brought him home that weekend. He slept for a full day, hobbling between corners of her small apartment, favoring spots where sun pooled near the floorboards. She left. Him be, no blankets, no fuss, just placed her own chair nearby and skimmed through books she hadn't touched in decades. Sometimes she read aloud again. By Wednesday, he returned to the library. She carried him the first time, wicker basket lined with an old scarf he seemed to like. He climbed out slowly, methodically tested the floor with his injured paw, and made his way toward the window seat like it was a path already memorized. Gasps escaped before greetings. Child dropped a board book in shock, Mr. Kendall murmured something hoarse and happy into his sleeve. Mina rushed in that afternoon with a sketch pad and a smile that didn't need words. Margaret placed a new sign on the windowsill, just beneath the old one. This one read, "Charlie, resident feline, card number 0001. It came with a tiny, laminated photo badge, a small ribbon he never wore, a legend made gentle. Over the months, his limp never quite faded. He moved differently now, deliberate, graceful in a grittier, slower, and wiser way. Patrons noticed, but didn't comment. If anything, their own steps softened to meet his pace. Children still read beside him. Old stories gained new resonance. People found excuses to pause by the window again, pressing their fingers gently against the glass as though committing the shape of him to memory, just in case. And Margaret? She returned to waking early on purpose, began baking. Again, peach muffins with too much crumble, always a few set aside for sharing. Some days, she'd arrive before sunrise just to sit beside him as the morning light gathered in ribbons across the linoleum. She smiled more freely now, said hello to strangers who lingered, laughed even when someone mistook Charlie for a stuffed animal and yelped when he blinked. Because now she knew. Some absences can snap you in half, but the returns, they don't glue you back. Together, they stitch a new pattern, one that stretches further, holds more, gleams warmer, seasons carried forward, snow to bloom, green to golden. The library breathed in rhythm with time, sighing into rainstorms and snuggling into the hush between school bells. But through it all, there was always that window, always Charlie. He slept more in recent years, his curls tighter, breathing slower. But no one minded. A resting guardian is still a guardian. And a heart shared once is not easily unheld. One night, not long before Christmas, Margaret dimmed the lights and moved toward the back of the library. Charlie cradled in her arms for the final walkthrough. Outside, snow began to fall, soft as breath. The window seat lay empty, cushions slightly indented, still warm. She tucked him back in carefully, brushed a spot on his cheek that caught the light like a memory, and sat beside him in the dark, with nothing loud between. Them, only the whir of the radiator, the hush of a sleeping town, and love, the kind that doesn't ask for page numbers or plot, just arrival and return.